It's kind of this joke on the first day. They say, okay, who thinks they're going to medical school? And everyone raises their hand. And the reality is not everyone is going to medical school. It's really important that you never consider yourself stuck where you are if you have interests that lie elsewhere. I think you should always be pursuing that. It always felt like a little bit of a risk to try a new strategy, but I always found it was interesting just to see how well I could remember with that strategy. And then going into the test almost felt like a game. I still feel imposter syndrome every time I feel like I meet a barrier and overcome that barrier. I feel like everyone's going to figure out I have no right being here.
Hello, Lauren.
Hello.
Thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you for
I
having me.
Lauren was my roommate in 2020.
Yeah.
You were lucky enough to live with me for a full year. I feel like that was the best year of her life.
One of them, potentially. It was the pandemic. It was not a good year for anyone, but you did make it significantly better.
That is not the reaction you gave
It was the best year of my life.
So we've already recorded this video, I think, 3 times. Just the introduction. First, we messed up the video, then we messed up the audio,
Yeah.
then we messed up a bunch of things. But I hope this time it works. So we've known each other since 2020,
Yeah.
and I have been very inspired with your story. Lauren switched careers in university, like she switched programs, started in rec and leisure, and then went into public health. So today we're going to talk about program switches, learning techniques, studying techniques, and then we'll talk about her paper. So let's just dive right into it. Tell me maybe a little bit about your career path. Where did you start, and where are you now?
Yeah. So I'm gonna go back all the way to high school and start there.
Right.
So in high school, I was not what I would consider the academic type. I did not go to classes as much as I should have. I did not get the best grades as a direct result of that. And I certainly never thought I would be where I am now. I never saw myself as the kind of person who would be in academia 10 years later. In high school, I wasn't good about attending class. I didn't get great grades because I didn't study for anything. I really didn't do my homework. I didn't enjoy it. I admittedly had a lot of other things going on. I mean, my dad was very sick for many of my high school years, and he passed away shortly after I finished high school before I started my undergrad. And I think I just started university with a really renewed sense of focus, I would say. So out of high school, I knew I felt like I had to go to university to make my family happy, and I really wanted to find something that would be the shortest program that would get me applied skills that could get me a job. And I thought I really liked throughout my high school career, I volunteered as a rec therapy assistant in a local nursing home. So we did activities and we did basically therapeutic recreation with the residents of that nursing home. And I really enjoyed it. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to do rec and leisure studies, recreation and leisure studies. I'm going to graduate in 4 years. I'm going to have the skills I need to be a rec therapist. It's going to be great. And that's what I'm going to do. And I will be done with school. So I applied and I got in at the University of Waterloo. And I started in the fall of 2018, which is a very long time ago. Oh, wow. I'm not going to think about that too much. But yeah, and I just immediately loved it. I loved being in school. I loved the constant challenge of studying for things and the tests and assignments. And I really, really enjoyed what I was learning about. And of that, I found I really, really enjoyed the health and the science aspects I was getting in the program. And so my very first term of university, I went to my academic advisor and I said, can I switch into the health studies program? Actually, no, I said, can I switch into the public health program, which is a Bachelor of Public Health rather than Bachelor of Science in Health Studies. And I didn't even think it would be a feasible request to transfer into the health studies program. And she said, no. She said, we over accepted and there's no room. And I'm so sorry, but that is just not going to happen. And so, okay, whatever, that's fine. I still like the program I'm in. And I went back and I did very well in my first term. And I went back to her in my second term once I had a little more credibility and I had a few grades on my transcript that showed I was doing very well in the program. And I asked her again if I could potentially switch into health studies. And I actually do think I told her in that about some of the circumstances that maybe meant I didn't have the grades I should have coming into university.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit of a different reaction that time. They said that I could do a qualifying term in the public health program. And if that went well, they would consider letting me transfer into health studies for a Bachelor of Science. My third term of university of undergrad was that qualifying term. And so there I took some of the biology and chemistry courses that I hadn't taken previous to my undergrad in high school. And it went really well. And I still remember getting the email saying, "Congratulations, you're in the health studies program," and just thinking, like,
That must have
whoa.
been a feeling.
Yeah, no, it really was. Thinking, I never thought I'd be doing a Bachelor of Science. Like, this is a girl who did not take high school chemistry and who did relatively poorly in high school in general. So
Your dad was also a professor at the University of Waterloo.
he was a
Yeah.
professor in the Faculty of Health. And I never tell anyone because I don't want to be the person that's, I don't know, being presumptuous or trying to get special connections or whatever. But I do think that's really cool. And I'm always kind of wondering, like, who worked with him? Who knew him? Because I don't know, who
Well,
knows?
now that you've graduated and you're working, like we'll touch upon that,
Yeah.
you probably should go
I
and
don't
ask.
know. I don't want to seem like I'm trying to think I'm something I'm not. So I'm always very hesitant to tell people. Like I would never I haven't told any of my profs, so I don't know. I do wonder, like, do you know? Because I don't know. I just don't know who he knew, who he worked very closely with, because it's been so many years. And at the time, I wasn't like, you don't pay attention to who your parents' colleagues are.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Who knows?
Yesterday, when we were talking about this, we were talking about at what moment did you realize you wanted to switch into public health? And the reason I ask is because there are so many people thinking about switching programs. I myself switched programs, but it was very late, even though I was thinking about it for a very long time. And sometimes people want to know what is a good enough reason, which I think any reason is good enough.
Yeah.
But was there a moment when you decided that you wanted to pivot?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't know if there was a specific moment that I made that decision, but I do think that I just realized where my interests lied, and I still really enjoyed Rec and Leisure, and I always want to emphasize that it was not just a program I started to segue. Like, I
Hmm.
was happy with that program and I saw a future with that degree. But at the same time, once I started, I realized I really like these health courses, and I like the challenge of some of the sciences that I hadn't necessarily taken before. And I really enjoyed studying for them, and I enjoyed learning about them and taking, like, testing for them. And I it was almost kind of a game, and I really, really like that. And I think, like, the very important thing is to just know that you are not stuck in what you started in, and it is always an option to pursue your interests. And if that doesn't align with the program you're in, I don't think people realize how common it is to
Yeah.
switch programs.
Yeah, it is
But
very common. And I
yeah,
think that's the whole point of university. You have
yeah,
to try different things and figure out what you enjoy, which is
hmm,
something that you have said so many times that I enjoyed doing this. I enjoyed,
yeah,
and I feel like that was a very big factor
oh
in
yeah,
your switch,
yeah,
looking at what you enjoy, where you have fun,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I really, really enjoy what I'm doing, and I think that's so important. And I think it's so unrealistic to expect people to know exactly what they want to do and what their interests are when they're 17 years old. And I had a late birthday. I was 17 when I was thinking of starting university. But I think university is a great opportunity to learn about that. And obviously, it's going to vary from faculty to faculty and program to program, as far as, and university to university, as far as how easy it is to switch programs. But I think it's really important that you never consider yourself stuck where you are if you have interests that lie elsewhere. I think you should always be pursuing that and never just assume it's not feasible, because there's a good chance it is, and you just got to explore your options and talk to people and
100%.
figure it out.
That's awesome. When people think about a career in public health, they just think about medical school
Hmm,
and being a doctor. And I know that you also considered that at one point, but
hmm.
your path is very different right now. So, can you talk a little bit about the career opportunities and what different paths people can take from public health?
Yeah. So, from public health and health studies, I would say public health, the program is a little bit more applied. So, a lot of the people that take the public health program will end up working in public health jobs, such as health promotion, things of that nature. For health studies, it's a Bachelor of Science, and a lot of the career options, there's a very broad range of career options out of that program, I would say. So it's kind of this joke on the first day. They say, okay, who thinks they're going to medical school? And everyone raises their hand. And the reality is, not everyone is going to medical school. In fact, a
Yeah.
very small group of people are probably going to go on to medical school. But I think a lot of people in that program go into that program with the idea that they're going to medical school. And that is one of the options and one of the career trajectories, but it's also important to understand how many fields you can get into from there, because I don't think I really understood. And so I personally went into research. And what that meant for me was that out of graduation from my undergrad, I started an MSc, a Master of Science, in the same faculty, and I do cannabis policy research. But another area that people can get into, I know people from the program that went on to work in global health, and they've worked on health initiatives in a bunch of different health system contexts in a bunch of different countries around the world. I know people that have gone to medical school, and I know people that have done all sorts of different kinds of research. And that's another thing I think I didn't realize was how many different kinds of public health research there were. I think I've always thought of research and public health research as like looking at things under a microscope and figuring out how it applies to a public health context.
Yeah.
But my work is very applied and not it's not a, we consider ourselves to be in a lab, but it's not what people would probably often consider a lab.
Yeah. When I think lab, I think microscope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I used to think too. So, what I do is very applied. We look at very complex data sets, and we look at changes in the population across policy changes. In my case, cannabis policy changes. So, for example, my paper was looking at changes across the recreational legalization of cannabis in Canada.
And we're going to talk about your paper
Yeah.
in the video. So, one thing that I'm interested in knowing is, did you feel any kind of imposter syndrome moving into public health? And at any point, did you feel that you had to work harder to prove yourself because you were from a different background?
Oh, 100%. I still feel imposter syndrome every time I feel like I meet a barrier and overcome that barrier, I feel like everyone's going to figure out I have no right being here and I don't know what I'm doing. And I think every step of the way I've thought, okay, this is the point where I'm going to fail and everything is going to come crashing down and I'm not going to be able to figure it out. I thought that when I started my undergrad career in rec and leisure, I thought that when I switched into health studies, I thought that when I started my master's, every step of the way. I still feel that right now going into my PhD in the fall, thinking this is the point where I'm not going to be able to pull it off and everything's going to, but I think, I don't know if that ever goes away. Maybe.
But if you feel that
Yeah.
so strongly, because I know we've talked about that, and I know
Yeah.
that you feel that imposter syndrome strongly,
Yeah.
it doesn't stop you. You
No.
keep going and you go right into it and you go deep. What keeps you going? What is that motivation?
Yeah, I think the important thing about imposter syndrome is to not let it define what you can do. I think it's okay to accept that you're going to feel that way.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's realistic to think that you're never going to feel that way for a lot of people and for me. But I do think that you just have to accept, like, okay, if it does, whatever. And you still got to try it. And it just, nothing has come crashing down yet. And usually it won't. And you're going to be fine. I think you just got to really try it and see what happens.
So you moved from rec and leisure to a more technical role. So did you
Mhm.
have to change your routine or your habits to adjust to a more technical role?
Yeah, I think I changed my study habits a little bit. I think I in general had a little bit of a weird study way of studying. I think maybe that's still true, but I do think it works very well for me. I reckon leisure, I will say, was more assignment based, less test based, I feel. Health studies more exam based, and I this might be very different now because I think now they have a lot more online quizzes and things, but I had to learn how to study and I wasn't often, and I don't want to say this isn't the, I think it is a very good way to study, but it's just never worked for me. I also think that's very important is to understand that what they call the best ways to study, which probably are the best ways to study based on research, are not always the ways that are going to work for you. Because I was never one that was good at reviewing things consistently every day. I was more of the cram before the exam type, and I still am, which I'm not promoting and I'm not condoning, but at the same time,
I am too.
yeah, but it
It's the
worked for
only thing
me.
that works for me. If I have a deadline, I
Yeah.
start working then.
And one of the things I did in the health studies program, and as I had to learn how to study for these tests and things, was really just trying different methods and seeing what worked for me. And I can talk about that a little bit
Yeah,
later
I
in now,
actually want
or
to go into it
yeah,
because what I noticed when we were living together is that you didn't stick to one technique if that wasn't working for you. So
yeah,
you weren't somebody who would read somewhere or watch a video that this is how you're supposed to
yeah,
study and you would stick to it. And then if it didn't work for you, you would still stick to it. You kept changing and adjusting your methods, which I thought was really impressive. I remember you used flashcards, you used to teach me,
Hmm.
and that was a way for you to learn.
Hmm.
So, can you talk a little bit about your learning techniques
Yeah.
and maybe how you switch from one to another? And then at the end, what you think is best for yourself?
Yeah, no, great point. So I have a few different strategies I use for different things. So I'll just kind of go through a bunch of them. I don't know if anyone here is doing research on pedagogy or how people learn things. Don't judge me and don't tell me I'm wrong, please. But yeah, I have a lot of different methods. So I will say for things where it's memorization and you have to remember definitions, a lot for my I use this a lot for my evolutionary biology class because it was remembering a lot of specific evolution terms and how uh, different processes worked or different things were referred to. I used flashcards through the Anki app, and I found that was very, very
Oh my
helpful for stuff
God.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I remember you discovered it, and
yeah.
I'm actually looking into it because I told you I want to learn
Oh,
Spanish, and
yes,
there's so
yes,
many things
yes.
you have to remember.
Yeah,
So for memorization, you used Anki flashcards.
yeah. I really enjoy Anki. Unfortunately, like that iPhone app, you have to pay for, which I don't love. But I thought that was so helpful. But for that was really only helpful for things where it was, how do I say this? It was term memorization. You were trying to remember definitions or terms. For conceptual stuff, it wasn't really my tool of choice, I would say. For conceptual stuff, if it was something that was completely new to me, and when I was starting biology that I hadn't really taken since high school, or I didn't do well in high school, and I felt like I was really learning from scratch, what I did, and again, this might be very unconventional, but I actually listened through my course recordings and I transcribed what it was and I found I remembered everything that way.
So
Yeah.
for you had different methods for different things. So for
Yeah.
memorization, you used Anki flashcards. Am I
Yes.
pronouncing that right? Is it Anki?
Anki, Anki,
Yeah.
I
So
don't know.
we'll just
Either
stick with
one.
Anki
Yeah.
flashcards.
ANKI. Yeah.
KIANKI. They're very popular, and
Yeah.
I think they've become more popular in the last few years.
Yeah.
For memorization, you use that, and for conceptual learning, you listen to it
Yeah. So I
and
would,
then wrote it down.
yeah, listen to the course recordings and write down what I was listening to. And I found if I did that, I would do that admittedly the day before the test, go through all the courses or the lectures from that unit, maybe a little bit faster than I should have, and recorded the parts, especially the conceptual parts that I didn't understand very well. And you just remember, I mean, at least for me, I remember everything that way. Like I just, and then if I see it on a quiz or a test, I know exactly what the answer is. And I found it worked very well. And then another strategy I had for things that were a little bit more familiar, such as like health classes, where some of the concepts were something I'd heard before and I knew a little bit better, but I still needed to memorize. I would have a master document that was just a Word document with point form of every concept that we had in that unit or in that class, and I would print it off. That's pretty old school now, but I would print it off
I love it.
and I would staple it, read through it, and every time I read something and I knew, okay, I know this well, I remember this, I don't need to read this anymore, I would check it off with the highlighter, check off the point, the bullet with a highlighter. And I would keep reading through that document, the things I hadn't checked off yet, over and over again, and just keep checking them off as I went until I maybe had like two concepts left that I didn't know really, really well before the test. I would just keep reading through it, keep checking off, keep reading through it, keep checking off, but don't check off anything until you're very sure that you know that. That was another strategy I used, and I found that worked really
Oh,
well too.
wow.
Yeah.
So repetition.
Yeah.
That is
Repetition
something
again.
that Anki does too,
Yeah.
right? It's repetition.
Yeah.
And when you know a concept, when you can tell or when you can give that feedback that
Yeah.
you are absolutely certain that you know that concept, then it stops giving it to you. Otherwise, it's all repetition.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like they're not really the conventional strategies. And I mean, I'm not going to say they're the best strategies out there. I think it's just really important that you try different things. And that was one thing I did was it always felt like a little bit of a risk to try a new strategy, but I always found it was interesting just to see how well I could remember with that strategy. And then going into the test almost felt like a game.
Game.
It was like, how well can I do with
So
what I did?
you put a fun element into everything.
Yeah.
That's what I'm noticing.
Yeah.
That's what the consistent theme is coming out
Yeah.
to
And
be.
I really enjoyed that part of it. Trying it's a competition with yourself to see how well you can do. It's like a constantly you can try different strategies and see how it works.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. So let's segue into your master's. What is your
Hmm.
master's about? And I believe you just completed it and you've
Yeah.
written a paper. So yeah, just talk to me about your master's and a little bit about what your paper is about.
Yeah, no, great question. So I started my Master of Science, my MSc in Public Health Sciences in 2022, fall of 2022, and I just finished in this past September. So it's 2 year master's, thesis based master's, which means sometimes you'll take a course or two or a few courses, but the bulk of your master's work is going to be research and conducting and publishing that research. So the first year of my master's, I wrote a paper looking at social norms for cannabis use, which is more or less whether people perceive other people approve of cannabis use or not. And then also whether people were comfortable using cannabis around other people, because that's also a measure of perceived approval.
Yeah.
And I looked at how this changed across recreational legalization in Canada in 2018. So I had survey data looking at 2018 pre legalization across 4 survey years. And yeah, I have also done a lot of work looking at marketing and cannabis marketing exposure. So, looking at whether policies change marketing exposure, whether the marketing restrictions themselves are effective in reducing marketing exposure, especially among particular groups in the population, such as underage people. And
That's what I found very interesting in your paper
mhm,
when I was reading about it. One was that there is no national survey that has been done on how social norms affect cannabis use. The second thing that I found very interesting was the difference between low income population and high income population and their acceptance of cannabis use versus the higher education population versus lower education population and their acceptance of cannabis use. So, can you tell me a little bit about that? Like the
yeah.
finding?
Yeah, of course. So, a few disclaimers. This was a lot of what I'm saying was accurate as of 2021 when I published the paper, or when
Mhm.
the last wave of data that we used in the paper was. It was published 2023, I believe, so a few years after that. But I will be speaking accurate to the period of data collection
Mhm.
and the period prior to publication. And then I also wanted to just spend a little bit more time explaining what income adequacy referred to. So, income adequacy is us asking participants how well do you feel you're able to make ends meet? And that's a little bit of a gauge of socioeconomic status. So, how adequate they feel their income is. Yeah, one of our findings was that high education individuals have higher perceived approval than lower education individuals. And I do want to preface this by just saying everything I'm saying is speculation, but this is why I think we were observing that. And I do think that might have something to do with the fact that historically, the people that were being punished for cannabis related um, crimes were lower education, lower socioeconomic status individuals, and it might still be an effect of that we're seeing higher education individuals perceive higher approval of cannabis. And there may still be lasting effects of which groups were predominantly and disproportionately marginalized because of cannabis use historically pre legalization. So even though cannabis is legal now and people aren't being arrested for using it
Yeah.
anymore, it is still likely that certain groups perceive lower approval of cannabis because of this. And it's going to take a long time for those, I don't know, for the long term trends to be apparent. We're still seeing the effect of pre legalization social norms. And I mean, this is true with everything we're looking at. It's going to take a decade at least to really understand what long-term trends are. And we all of our data has been affected by the pandemic as well,
Yeah.
which happened only 2 years after we legalized cannabis.
Hmm.
So it's really going to take some time to understand what long-term trends are, not just for normalization, though it does appear that um, things are on an upward trend for normalization. But yeah, I mean, comfort using cannabis decreased in 2020, which makes sense because there is a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's very interesting to look at, but it's also important to understand that the data that we used was such a small period of time after legalization that we really need to keep looking at trends over
Yeah.
time.
Another thing that I was really interested in, and it was mind blowing to me that you said social norms are influenced by policy, but can also shape policy.
Oh,
So, can
absolutely.
you talk to me a little bit about that? I just found it so interesting that the reason they considered legalizing cannabis use in Canada was because of social norms, but because they legalized cannabis use, people started accepting it more.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like it's exactly that. One of the reasons that cannabis was legalized in the first place was because there had been an upward trend in social norms for so long. I mean, it was cannabis use was already pretty normalized by the time we legalized, and that was a huge contributing factor to
Yeah.
legalization in Canada. That was one of the points that our former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau really campaigned on as well. So it was already something that was wanted in the population to a certain degree. And the positive norms surrounding cannabis were one of the massive contributing factors to recreational legalization in Canada. At the same time, that recreational legalization is going to further increase those social norms and make people perceive cannabis as more approved of and a more positive thing. Not necessarily a positive thing, but a more positive thing than the way it had previously been perceived. And we've been seeing this upward trend for a very long time.
That is very interesting. I'm also going to link her paper in the description box below if you guys want to check it out. And what are you doing in the future? I know that you're working on two other papers and they're
Yeah.
not published yet, but are you allowed to talk about it?
I will talk about it a little bit. I won't
Hmm.
refer to specific journals or
Of
anything,
course.
but so two of the articles that are currently under review, I haven't published them yet. I've submitted them to a journal and hopefully they will be published soon. I've also looked at marketing restrictions and policy and then the effects of those things on marketing exposure, particularly among underage people. We know that cannabis marketing exposure is a predictor of future cannabis use. So, what I wanted to do with those papers was look at things that are potentially affecting marketing exposure, particularly among underage people or youth. So I looked at US survey data in all across states with illegal, medical, or recreational cannabis. And I looked at the effects of the different policy contexts on marketing exposure, as well as how marketing exposure changed across those policy changes. So, for example, from illegal to medical, legal or legal status, and then from medical to recreational legal status. And we found more or less what you would expect. I'm not going to get into the details too much,
Yeah.
but hopefully soon that will be published. I don't want to talk about the results, but
Yeah, of course. But when
yeah.
that is published, whenever I would encourage you to come back and check out her all three of her papers. I'll
Hmm.
link all three in the description below because it was a very interesting read.
Yeah.
And especially from someone who's not from that background. And I thought I wouldn't understand half the things that were in the paper, but it was a very easy read and I love how you wrote everything out. What does the future look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have applied to a few PhD programs. I'm hoping to start my PhD in the fall. I will be starting my PhD for the fall. I'm just not entirely sure what I'm going to be looking at yet. So I was trying to explore a few different directions. I really love what I'm doing with policy evaluation, but a huge barrier to policy evaluation is the lag between publishing the research on policy changes and then actually getting anyone that has any control over those policies to acknowledge your research, take your research into consideration, and implement policies that incorporate that research and those findings. And so, one thing that I have kind of been drawn to and I find very interesting is this idea of a learning health system. So, it's within a smaller institution, such as a primary care facility or a mental health or addictions care facility. And essentially, what a learning health system is they are implementing changes, looking at the effects of those changes, and then learning from those, analyzing those, and incorporating or integrating new changes as a result of those findings. So it's a system or a cycle of research, analysis, and implementation. And it takes out that big barrier that is trying to get anyone that has the power to change something to look at your findings and change something. So I really like that idea and I find that very interesting. So I was hoping to pursue something like that for my PhD. I applied to one person who does that for primary care, and then I also applied to someone who does that for addictions work. And I just think it's such an interesting area. And then the person who does it for addictions work, they also do a lot of neuroscience work, looking at neuroimaging, things of that nature. And I just think that is so interesting. And I'm hoping to find out this week whether that is going to be a thing that is happening. But regardless, I just feel like there's so many exciting avenues to explore. And I think that's really what it's all about. You got to find what you enjoy, and there's not one thing that's going to make you happy. And I think this is one of those opportunities to go in a new direction, or not even a new direction, but to explore a new area and expand your knowledge. And I love these times. I feel like it's just very exciting. And I think no matter what direction I go in, it's going to be really interesting work. and I'm gonna really enjoy it.
So thank you so much for
Yeah, thank
coming,
you.
for
This has been
helping me
great.
set everything up,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and for talking about your experience. I'm going to bring her back.
I'll be back.
Yeah, she'll be back.
Hopefully, I'll have some fun updates by then, and I'll have two more papers published when they finally get published.
That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye.
Bye.